All right, y'all, Cassie may have been served. If you guys remember, this guy right here, Mr. Clayton Howard, he spoke extensively on how he was a sex worker for Diddy and for Cassie. And today, a judge has told him that he needs to serve her by any means necessary. I guess he was claiming that she was unreachable. So either she has been served or she is about to be served by any means necessary. All right, so I have the full complaint here and we are going to get into it. All right, let me bring it up. Oh, I think I have to remove. Okay. Okay, so we have Clayton Howard versus Sean Combs, Cassandra Ventura, Bad Boys Records, Epic Records, Comb Enterprises, and the Beverly Hills Hotel, okay? And Doe Corporations 1 through 10, which I'm assuming encompass like Love Records and stuff like that, other businesses of Diddy's. Okay, a jury trial has been demanded. Trigger warning, this document contains highly graphic information of a sexual nature, including sexual assault. All right, plaintiff Clayton Howard hereby alleges, as and for his complaint against defendant Sean Combs, Cassandra Ventura, Bad Boy Entertainment, Bad Boy Records, Epic Records, Combs Enterprises LLC, and Doe Corporations 1 through 10, together defendant corporations, and together with Mr. Combs, defendants as follows. Plaintiff Clayton Howard brings this civil action against defendants Sean Combs and Cassandra Ventura, arising from an 8-year period of systematic sexual exploitation, trafficking, and abuse that occurred between approximately 2009 and 2019. This case exposes the darker truth behind the widely publicized narrative surrounding defendant Ventura's recent civil settlement and the ongoing criminal prosecution of defendant Combs. Okay, now if y'all remember, he was saying that Cassie, like he's seen her get beat up sometimes, but other times he believed that she was a willing participant. So I don't know. Okay, let's keep going. Defendant Sean Combs is a prominent rapper and record executive known by his stage name Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, or Diddy, who rose to fame in the early 1990s with his record label Bad Boy Records and is regularly referred to as a hip hop mogul. Defendant Cassandra Ventura, known professionally as Cassie, is a singer, actress, and model who gained prominence in the early 2000s with her single Me and You, and appeared in films including The Perfect Match and Step It Up 2, The Streets. Defendant maintained a highly publicized romantic relationship from 2007 to 2018, during which both were toxic individuals addicted to opiates. See, look how he's putting them together. Oh, God. Okay. Sorry, which both were toxic individuals addicted to opiates, methamphetamines, who had no regard for others or the law. Their relationship was categorized by sexually explicit, depraved activity categorized as swinging, with defendant Combs harboring a specific fetish for voyeurism. The relationship was abusive, with defendant Combs frequently physically assaulting defendant Ventura in response to domestic incidents neither could emotionally control. Oh, look what he got. The misleading public narrative. Mm-mm. In late 2023, defendant Ventura filed a civil action against defendant Combs, pursuant to the Gender Motivated Violence Act, alleging that Combs manipulated, abused, and controlled her for over a decade through violent behavior and disturbing demands. She claimed to have spent over a decade trapped in a cycle of abuse, violence, and sex trafficking, including allegations that Combs forced her to engage in sex acts with male sex workers while he masturbated and filmed the encounters. The parties settled this action within 24 hours for $20 million. Subsequently, the Office of the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York arrested and indicted defendant Combs for sex trafficking and violations of the Mann Act, with the prosecution's foundation based largely on defendant Ventura's allegations. Defendant Combs currently faces trial on RICO charges. Okay, so we know that this was filed before the sentence. Okay, contrary to the narrative presented in defendant's Ventura's civil complaint and the subsequent criminal prosecution, the truth reveals a far more complex and disturbing reality. Defendant Ventura was not merely a victim forced into sexual encounters with male escorts, but rather an active and engaged participant who willingly manipulated and exploited others, including plaintiff, to satisfy the sexually depraved desires of defendant Combs and herself. For more than 8 years, defendants operated a scheme whereby they systematically exploited plaintiff through manipulation, coercion, controlled substances, and threats of violence to engage in non-consensual sexual activity for their gratification and commercial purposes. Defendant Ventura accomplished this exploitation by concealing her identity and fabricating the narrative that she and defendant Combs were married, using this deception to entice men into drug use and sexual encounters. Defendants drug plaintiff with controlled substances, including MDMA, in doses 3 times stronger than what defendant Ventura herself consumed to lower his inhibitions and facilitate sexual exploitation. Defendant Ventura used these substances strategically, like a spider catching its prey in a web, to manipulate plaintiff into unprotected sexual contact designed to please defendant Combs and improve her devotion to his appetites. Wow. Defendant Ventura would command plaintiff to masturbate for hours while she pleasured herself to climax, visibly satisfying herself at the sight of plaintiff's anatomy. Okay. These extended masturbation sessions often left plaintiffs, oh my God, penis bruised and swollen, injuries about which he would complain to defendant Ventura, seeking consideration. However, defendant Ventura showed no mercy, simply demanding compliance while pleasuring herself in a manner she hoped would satisfy defendant Combs, who derived satisfaction from watching her gratification through his voyeuristic desires. During these encounters, defendant Combs watched silently in the shadows, directing the activities as if he were a film director, orchestrating his vision. Once defendant Ventura was ready to begin, defendant Combs regulated her responses and controlled the rate of sexual activity, exercising complete dominance over both plaintiff and defendant Ventura in what the couple considered a special shared experience. While defendant Combs appeared to serve as a protector rather than an oppressor, supporting defendant Ventura's desires and catering to her with wine and fruit during encounters, his presence was deliberately intimidating as part of his role in protecting his partner from the men they exploited. Threats of violence were implied when defendant Combs wished to assert control, and during at least one encounter, he threatened to pistol whip plaintiff, directing defendant Ventura to the master suite to retrieve his firearm. At no time did defendant Ventura display fear when engaged in or about to engage in sexual encounter. That's it right there. All abuse witnessed by plaintiff occurred due to domestic complications between the defendants, including jealousy, ego, and arrogance, aided by extensive drug use and sleep deprivation, which contributed to violent outbursts. Oh man, okay. From defendant Combs, who consumed far more drugs than defendant Ventura, sexual assault, and non-consensual recording. Over the years, plaintiff was sexually assaulted by defendant Ventura, who would manipulate and force herself upon plaintiff during her menstrual cycle against his will. Defendants filmed plaintiff in compromising encounters without his consent for years, creating recordings that the couple would watch together after the encounters ended and use for mutual masturbation. Masturbation. When plaintiff confronted defendant, oh my gosh, when plaintiff confronted defendant Ventura about the recording and vocalized his desire not to be recorded, she explained that she enjoyed their sexual relationship and provided her reasons for the recordings. Defendant Ventura then opened her MacBook to a previous recording and masturbated to climax in front of plaintiff while watching an encounter involving the two of them, demonstrating the extent of her manipulation and control. For more than 5 years, defendant trafficked plaintiff for purposes of commercial sex, using him as entertainment to satisfy their sexual fetishes and personal ambitions. The couple drugged, manipulated, and traumatized plaintiff while themselves engaging in a toxic, domestically abusive relationship that often became violent. Defendant Ventura had a specific preference in selecting her companions and chose plaintiff for 8 years over many other available options, as subsequent criminal trial proceedings have revealed. The allegations demonstrate that defendant Ventura deceived, manipulated, and injured plaintiff and therefore should be held accountable alongside defendant Combs, as the two were partners in these criminal enterprises. Wow. Okay. Obstruction of justice and witness manipulation. Plaintiff's ability to seek timely legal recourse was deliberately frustrated through a coordinated effort involving his former counsel, who communicated with federal prosecutors without plaintiff's presence. The plaintiff was advised to remain silent and was manipulated into inaction, with his attorney intentionally delaying action to protect defendant Ventura's credibility. The plaintiff was specifically advised that should he file a complaint, he would lose credibility before the court and therefore should refrain from doing so if he wished to do what was right and tell the truth. His counsel deceived, ignored, and misled him regarding the creation of the initial complaint against defendants and when it would be filed. Despite serving as a compliant witness for the government and providing information that was later corroborated by investigators, thereby validating his credibility and the truthfulness of his statements, federal prosecutors ultimately withheld plaintiff's testimony despite its corroborative value and his valid allegations against both defendants. Denial of justice and present claims. For many years, plaintiff has lived with this trauma in silence, forced to endure the psychological and physical consequences with no visible avenue for justice. While defendant Ventura's allegations have destroyed defendant Combs' career, she has escaped liability by using allegations of abuse to avoid criminal responsibility for her own actions, thereby denying victims like plaintiff the justice to which they are entitled. With the opening of legislation that granted survivors a look-back window to seek justice against offenders, plaintiff learned he had been given a second chance to obtain the justice he deserved. The plaintiff has sought justice for over a year, only to be denied through the manipulation of legal professionals who wished to effect the criminal trial of Sean Combs. Mr. Howard was used and manipulated. Now, tired of the misconduct and incompetence, he has sought action himself and refuses to remain silent any longer in the face of this systematic exploitation, abuse, and attorney misconduct. This action seeks declaratory, injunctive, and monetary relief under federal sex trafficking statutes. Okay, and it just names them: the New York State Human Rights Law, New York Services for Victims of Human Trafficking, the California Trafficking Victims Protection Act, Civil Cause of Action for Human Trafficking, Civil Remedy for Human Trafficking, Sexual Assault pursuant to California abuse. Okay, sex trafficking for the severe psychological, physical, and dignitary harms plaintiffs suffered during this prolonged period of exploitation and abuse. Okay, so then it goes over jurisdiction and venue. All right, the parties: plaintiff Clayton Howard, um, and Mr. Howard was recruited and manipulated by the defendant Sean Combs, um, Cassie Ventura, Bad Boys Records, and Bad Boy Entertainment. Wow, 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 wow. Okay, so this is saying where everybody lives. Okay. Mr. Howard meets Combs and Ventura under fraudulent circumstances. Mr. Howard met Miss Ventura in late 2009. Miss Ventura, who identified herself as Jackie Starr, invited Mr. Howard to the London hotel located in New York City to serve as a male companion and provide her with time and company in the privacy of her hotel room for an agreed upon hourly rate. Miss Ventura attempted to conceal her identity through the use of makeup, a large red wig, and dim lighting in the room, which created poor visual conditions. Miss Ventura failed to inform Mr. Howard prior to the meeting that another party would be present. Immediately after greeting Mr. Howard, Miss Ventura offered him alcohol and a marijuana cigarette, then instructed him to be seated in the living room. The two parties spoke for approximately 30 minutes while becoming familiar and relaxed. After approximately 30 minutes, Miss Ventura asked to see the personal identification of Mr. Howard for safety purposes so she would know who he really was. Having nothing to hide and wanting to make a woman he assumed alone comfortable, he provided Miss Ventura, Jackie Starr, with his driver's license, revealing his true identity. Miss Ventura informed Mr. Howard of her intentions by standing and requesting that he expose his genitals. Under the influence of the substances provided, Mr. Howard agreed to Miss Ventura's request and she claimed to be impressed. Miss Ventura then informed Mr. Howard that they were not alone and that her husband was upstairs, but assured him that the situation was acceptable because her husband had consented to her having a male companion visit to see where things might lead. Miss Ventura explained that she and her husband were participants in the lifestyle and that her husband preferred to watch her be pleasured by men with larger male reproductive organs. She lied about that, I'm sure. I'm sure he did not say that. She felt like that, but I'm sure he didn't say that. Okay. Miss Ventura stated that she preferred men with darker complexions, complimenting Mr. Howard's complexion before excusing herself to retrieve her husband so that activities could begin. Miss Ventura retrieved Mr. Combs, who she introduced as her husband and presented to Mr. Howard under the alias Frank. Mr. Combs greeted Mr. Howard with indifference, then retrieved baby oil and Astroglide lubricant, both of which had been positioned on a platter on the center table. Mr. Combs then retreated to a darkened corner of the room where poor lighting made it difficult to observe his movements clearly. Mr. Howard was instructed not to address Mr. Combs, Frank, directly and to speak only to Miss Ventura, Jackie. Mr. Combs concealed his identity by wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his eyebrows and a cloth tied around his nose and mouth, which obscured his facial features and made him unrecognizable. When Mr. Combs did speak, it was to inquire whether Miss Ventura was acceptable or if she needed anything. Mr. Combs also provided direction to both Mr. Howard and Miss Ventura, regulating the pace of their physical contact, as will be further explained in subsequent paragraphs. Oh my God. The first encounter and the structure of the activities. This first encounter served as plaintiff's initial education into what would be required of him by the defendants, with all subsequent encounters following an identical structure that forms the basis for the description of all encounters described hereafter within this complaint. Okay, so all the encounters pretty much happen the same way. During each encounter, Mr. Howard had no autonomy. He was required to follow orders and was expected not to disobey. Financial compensation was used as a form of dominance once Mr. Howard was committed to any activities within the encounter. Mr. Howard was instructed by Miss Ventura to remove all his clothing upon entry into the suite and to surrender his clothing and phones to Miss Ventura. Mr. Howard's cell phone was turned off and surrendered with his clothing to Miss Ventura, which prevented him from leaving by choice without compromising his safety. Some suites required keys to access the floors and had no access to stairwells without triggering alarms, making escape difficult. Mr. Howard was instructed by Miss Ventura to apply baby oil to his new body. When Mr. Howard applied the oil to his hand and began to distribute it evenly, Miss Ventura would use her own bottle to saturate Mr. Howard's chest, abdomen, and arms with oil before stepping closer and attempting to apply it evenly herself. Miss Ventura often sprayed Mr. Howard with oil during application to make distribution over his skin easier. The defendant structured these encounters into 4 phases. 1. no touch. 2. Soft foreplay. 3. Fellatio. And 4. Intercourse, which were directed by Mr. Combs for the purpose of controlling Miss Ventura's arousal and timing of climax. Wow. During these phases, Mr. Howard had no input or ability to offer suggestions and was simply expected to comply. Through the use of manipulation and financial coercion, Mr. Howard would remain in these phases for hours, with each individual stage lasting for over an hour. Miss Ventura controlled the start of the activity and would seek Mr. Combs' permission regarding when she could progress to the next stage. If Mr. Combs was not ready, he would refuse permission, but he would often granted Miss Ventura permission to masturbate if she requested. Once the activity began, Mr. Combs controlled its progression and pace, seeking to control Miss Ventura's desires while pleasuring himself, rather than directly participating. These prolonged why can I not say masturbation? Masturbation sessions frequently caused skin tears, oh my god, and scabs on Mr. Howard's penis, causing him severe pain and scarring. While Mr. Howard stood covered in baby oil, Miss Ventura and Mr. Combs would masturbate while watching him, which gave him a constant feeling of uneasiness and uncertainty. While Mr. Howard was ordered to stay nude, both defendants would pleasure themselves to the point of climax. Both defendants would be intoxicated, using substances and alcohol to alter their moods and keep them awake. Some of the substances were Schedule 1 narcotics, including amphetamines and opiates. The specific drugs used included ecstasy, GHB, ketamine, cocaine, MDMA, Molly, and marijuana. Miss Ventura, in the early and middle years, was extremely physical with Mr. Howard and would orally pleasure him for periods exceeding 1 hour at times. What? Dehydrated from drugs, lack of water, and constant engagement in oral sex, Miss Ventura would often perform oral sex until she had to stop when her jaw became sore from prolonged activity. I don't know why they have Miss. She's married, Mrs. I don't know. Okay. When intercourse was to occur, Miss Ventura's arousal would be so heightened that she would often beg Mr. Combs to allow her to engage. Wow. I gotta cut that off. All right, let me get back to it. Okay, Mr. Howard was directed to engage in sexual contact with Miss Ventura until she climaxed and was only allowed to stop once Miss Ventura reached climax. Once Mr. Combs consented to sexual contact, Miss Ventura controlled the degree of intimacy, including kissing, the intensity of kissing, and whether she would engage in unprotected sex, as will be described in later paragraphs. Once the climax of Miss Ventura occurred, the cycle would repeat. One encounter with Miss Ventura could consist of 15 to 30 individual sessions, each including all 4 stages. The number of sessions also depended on the number of days Mr. Howard would be detained until the defendants were ready to return his phone, clothing, and release him. Not detained. Oh my God. Okay. If Mr. Howard attempted to leave, he would be coerced by Miss Ventura into waiting or ignored if he knocked on the suite's master bedroom door seeking to retrieve his items to leave. Miss Ventura manipulates Mr. Howard into MDMA use and unprotected sex. During the trial testimony of Miss Ventura, Mr. Howard heard her statements regarding Mr. Combs and how she allegedly had been forced to have unprotected sex with male entertainers. Miss Ventura claimed to have never wanted such activities and to have only engaged in them as a result of Mr. Combs' abuse and attempts to blackmail her. Although this allegation was substantiated in one instance during the trial, it is not the same at all. It does not completely substantiate all of Miss Ventura's claims of force and coercion, as every instance is not the same. Mr. Howard confidently asserts that Mr. Combs did not force Miss Ventura. Wow. Did not force Miss Ventura to engage in a sexual encounter after the overdose she experienced while in his presence. It was Miss Ventura who begged for the encounter despite Mr. Combs' repeated attempts to end the night due to the overdose. Mr. Howard confidently asserts that it was Miss Ventura who initiated unprotected sexual contact with him, and Mr. Combs had no knowledge of it occurring until it was underway. Wow. Once Mr. Combs, who was observing the sexual activity, noticed there was no condom being used, he stopped the activity and confronted Miss Ventura about her actions. In response, Miss Ventura lied to Mr. Combs, falsely informing him that she had reviewed Mr. Howard's STD results and had confirmed that he was completely clean. Mr. Howard, immediately conscious of the lie, interrupted and told Mr. Combs the truth, which was that Miss Ventura had told him was false. Mr. Howard then provided his actual STD results to Mr. Combs directly from his email. Once unprotected sex began, Mr. Howard would be pressured into continuing it by both parties. Mr. Howard was told he would be the exclusive partner of Miss Ventura, and it was agreed he would be compensated in exchange for clean test results and continued exceptional service. The arrangement was agreed to after Mr. Howard was coerced into participating in an orgy with Mr. Ventura and Mr. Combs and another male provider named Daniel Phillip. The goal of the orgy was to determine who could please Miss Ventura the longest without issue, Mr. Howard or Mr. Phillip. The two men were offered substances and expected to perform continuously, taking turns with Miss Ventura, who was an eager and willing participant. This encounter lasted for nearly 2 days before it ended. When Mr. Howard outlasted Mr. Phillip, he was declared the winner and the exclusive arrangement was proposed. Drug use was a major component of the encounters during the majority of the meetings. Mr. Howard did not engage in harder drugs for the first until they were offered to him by Miss Ventura. Mr. Howard, seeking to stay awake in response to repeated requests to satisfy Miss Ventura, began to have difficulty staying awake as more was demanded of him. Miss Ventura offered Mr. Howard ecstasy, claiming it to be light and harmless in the dose she would provide. Mr. Howard would later learn from Miss Ventura that she had tripled his dose in order to get him freaky, as he recalls, and increase the intensity of the encounter. Believing the two were monogamous since the exit of Mr. Phillip, always receiving clean results when taking STD tests, and through the inducement of drugs and alcohol, the unprotected sex continued. Mr. Howard impregnated Miss Ventura, who ultimately decided to abort the pregnancy when she was unable to locate Mr. Howard for a period of time. Even after aborting a pregnancy, Miss Ventura sought to have unprotected sex during the encounters for years after. Wow. Okay. After reconnecting when separated for almost 8 months, Miss Ventura confessed to Mr. Howard at New York City's Gramercy Park Hotel that she had aborted a pregnancy created by Mr. Howard. Despite this revelation, Miss Ventura insisted on unprotected sex during that very encounter, which lasted for several days, as the two reconnected after the separation. It was after his victory in the encounter with Daniel Phillip that Miss Ventura drugged Mr. Howard with a triple dose of ecstasy and manipulated him into engaging in unprotected sex. Oh, man. Okay. Let me see how long. Okay. Okay. Mr. Howard is drugged by Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura. Miss Ventura drugs Mr. Howard. Mr. Howard recalls being drugged by Miss Ventura, who admitted to doing so when asked once Mr. Howard contacted her again after the initial incident. Specifically, Mr. Howard was given ecstasy by Miss Ventura after he complained of exhaustion due to the demands placed upon him during the encounters. Instead of providing coffee or an energy drink, Miss Ventura retreated to the bedroom and returned with an ecstasy pill. When Mr. Howard complained about his disdain for pills, Miss Ventura crushed the pill and put it in a drink she prepared, informing Mr. Howard she had only included a small dose. Having known Miss Ventura for several years at this point, Mr. Howard trusted her to consume the drink prepared by Miss Ventura. Mr. Howard recalls feeling hot and beginning to sweat uncontrollably within several moments of consumption. When he complained of this to Miss Ventura, her response was a passionate kiss before she aggressively grabbed hold of his penis and placed it in her mouth. Mr. Howard recalls never feeling so intoxicated in his life, with the drug enhancing all his senses and sexual desires. He and Miss Ventura began with condoms, but they were removed by Miss Ventura, who quickly rolled off the protection and pressured an unprotected contact, while Mr. Howard's inhibitions had been lowered. Mr. Mr. Howard and Miss Ventura would engage in the encounter for over 2 days, while Mr. Combs watched and on occasion engaged in contact with Miss Ventura. When the parties were all exhausted, Mr. Howard was given back his belongings and allowed to leave. He was compensated with additional funds due to his condition caused by dehydration and lack of sleep. Mr. Howard left confused, dehydrated, and disoriented, ultimately pulling his vehicle over and parking on the side of a grocery store. He woke up hours later, weak and sweating. He was able to get help by calling an Uber, which brought him home. Oh my God, let me pause. Which brought him home to his girlfriend. He spent 3 days recovering from the encounter. After Mr. Howard confronted Miss Ventura during the following encounter, she confessed to drugging him. There's too many people in here, y'all, so I'm about to pause it. Following his confession, he did not accept beverages from her except 3 times. He accepted a drink over the next 5. The final drink led to a physical assault on Miss Ventura. All right, I'm going to pause it, and I'll pick back up.